Hello and welcome once again to the business programme here on Kirklees Local TV. As I sit here in late November talking to the camera, outside it's dark, it's cold, it's wet, it's really miserable. I'm thinking, do we really need to think back to 2019, or have we to look forward to maybe what 2020 brings us? So on that basis I thought, why not just do a programme whereby I put my personal views together on what I think are going to be some of the key issues that are going to arise in 2020. I'm probably going to be certainly wrong on most of them, but if it generates some discussion, some thought and some action, some positive action, then maybe it's been worthwhile. So where do we start? Let's use a traditional sort of MBA strategy class analysis, and we'll look at a pestle analysis of what's going to happen. So unfortunately that means we've got to start with politics. Now, I've not seen the manifestos yet as we record this, so whatever I suggest is probably going to be completely wrong. So many different events are going to happen between now and mid-December. So it's very early to say, but what do I think is going to happen? I think possibly the Conservatives will get a majority, maybe a working majority. But the world's changed. There's so much uncertainty now. I wouldn't be surprised either if there's not a three-figure majority. Unlikely, but these things could happen. But what will that mean? Well, it will mean probably that Brexit will happen as some format. But next year I think we're still going to be facing this perennial problem of what sort of deal we have, what sort of Brexit it is. So if you sat there sort of optimistically thinking that problem's gone away, I don't think it will. I think it'll be a recurring nightmare for us all next year. What else can I say? Well, politics has changed, there's no doubt about that. Big issues that we're going to be faced with next year are sort of, again, trust in politicians. I think we tend to focus too much on what they say as opposed to what they actually do, and I think that's something that's going to become apparent next year. What else? I think we can safely say that the 2+bit party system has probably started to broken now. Rather than sort of allegiance to parties and tribes, populace is changing its opinion, isn't it? It's sort of moving more to the anywheres or somewheres, and it's changing as well maybe to the Democrats and the anti-Democrats, and sort of allegiance to particular parties are changing, which I think is going to have massive repercussions for politics in the future. And that means that maybe we're going to be chatting more about the need for proportional representation. Maybe we need to reform the House of Lords, and maybe there's going to be a big issue about how our political parties are funded. And as we sort of work our way through those, what impact is that potentially going to have on business? In terms of impact on business, what's going to happen internationally? Well, we could spend hours sort of trying to discuss that, but I think maybe the two big things are what happens in America and what happens in China. Next year, will Trump get re-elected? Will he get nominated and re-elected again? Not sure on that one. But I'm sort of looking for alternatives, and maybe there's a female Republican that might sort of attract some interest, a lady called Nikki Haley. Could be completely wrong on that, but it's a wild card to watch. And what happens in China, what happens in Hong Kong, yeah, you just have a feeling maybe that's not going to end well. Which sort of takes us on then to the economy. Let's think about that. I think next year, once we've decided which direction we're going in Brexit, the economy is going to be fine. There's a lot of growth potential stacked up there. It's quiet at the moment because people are waiting for things to happen. And I think it's very easy to be pessimistic about the future and say it's going to be disastrous, when in actual fact I think it might just be the opposite. Brexit won't be the disaster that everybody's forecasting, and as I've tried to sort of research that a little bit more, I sort of came across the Treasury forecast from last year that was sort of suggesting that, and this is my interpretation, that if we said now the economy was worth 100 apples per year, which is a bit of a strange anomaly to take, but if we said it's worth 100 apples, then the Treasury was forecasting that in 15 years' time, if we stayed in the EU, the economy would have grown by 24 apples, let's say, or 24%. But they did suggest as well that if we did nothing, we came without a deal, in 15 years' time, the economy would be worth 18 apples more. So are we sort of arguing about 6 apples in 15 years' time if we do nothing? I think there's a lot more to be, a lot of benefits to be had there. But if the economy is going to grow, we need a lot more focus. And I think the focus that we've got to put, and the emphasis we've got to put into the economy has to be maybe on green technologies, but also on healthcare as well. Once upon a time, the UK was one of the world leaders in healthcare in terms of research and technology. Why can't we do that again? Let's move on now to thinking about some of the social aspects. And I think some of the key talking points and some of the issues that are going to affect business next year are going to be around social media. Is that going to continue to grow, or is it going to start to go into decline? How many of us are maybe starting to switch off Facebook accounts or not use them as much and not trust social media simply because we can't trust it? It's unregulated. It's almost like the Wild West. How many people retweet and repost things without being able to check its validity, or with actually not making sure they've actually read it properly to start with? And how much of it is sort of forming a bipolarisation? It's becoming very much this echo chamber, isn't it, where people look for reinforcement of their views as opposed to accepting challenge on their views. So I suspect social media will come under a lot of scrutiny, and I'll come back to that again later. But one of the great positives I see about sort of the social aspect and how it's going to affect business next year is the rise of community. Through the 80s and 90s, we had the concepts of positive and becoming negative liberty, and I won't go into that at length because that is really a confusing picture. But we got the defragmentation of society. I think it was Margaret Thatcher, wasn't it, that said there's no such thing as society. We were all forced into becoming individuals, and we relied on government to support us. And I think maybe the only benefit that we can see coming out of the floods in South Yorkshire at the moment has been very much sort of this rise of community. There's an exasperation that nobody's been to help them, the government hasn't done enough. But I think we're going to start seeing that people start doing more for themselves and do more for themselves as a community, which I think's going to be really beneficial for society and really beneficial as well for a lot of business opportunities. So let's move on to technology. And my thoughts here link very much back to the economic issues. See very much the opportunity there for real exploitation of green technologies and real exploitation of healthcare that I've mentioned. If we think about green technologies, we look at the car industry and things like that, the move towards electrics. I think that's maybe going to be a bit more of a blind alley. And I think there's great opportunities to exploit more the potential of hydrogen power and the potential of nuclear. Not necessarily the nuclear that we've got before at the moment, but to move on to things like nuclear fusion and thorium technologies and things like that, which are inherently much safer. As we sort of get towards the end, let's just look at something that's really important, which obviously is the environment. Many political parties have suggested that the most important issue at this election is the environment. I can't see that at the moment. I think Brexit still has to be resolved. But the next election, the environment has to be a critical issue. And I think the starting point from that is thinking about us as individuals. What actions are we taking? And as I was sort of putting my thoughts together on this, I was looking back to what I've done recently. And I'm not after a gold medal for this or anything like that, but I was thinking, well, what happens now? I've recently insulated the house, we've changed windows and doors, put a new high efficiency boiler in place. A couple of years ago I invested in a plug-in hybrid car, and I now consciously try and only take one return flight per year on holiday. And I think more of us are doing that, and maybe doing it subconsciously. And I think once we move that into the conscious, it starts to have a positive impact on society. How many of us are now sort of looking at plastics and thinking, no, I don't need it in that packaging? And how many of us are recycling more? And I think when sort of the after dinner, around the dinner table discussions in groups start moving on to sort of discussing what we're doing environmentally, we know then that we've started to make a big impression. So it's about individual actions, but I think it's about governments as well being brave. It's not about taking us back to the Stone Age and destroying the economic society that we've built up, but it is very much about sort of brave decisions. Be interesting to see which government around the world is the first to tax aviation fuel for interest stake, and that'll be a big monumental mindset step forward, I think, when that happens. And so my final point really is thinking about what sort of legal issues are going to arise in 2020. Obviously cybercrime is a critical issue, and we're going to have to put the resources into that. But also look at other wonderful examples around the world. Let's look at Estonia, and let's look at the e-society that they've created there, the way that they've really switched on to a digital economy and a digital population. And you look there at sort of being able to masquerade on Twitter as various aliases and things like that. Maybe we're going to start to see the issues of legal identity in the cloud start to come out. You know, do we have to have sort of licenses to be able to log on to the internet? Do we need to really identify ourselves? I don't know. But all I can say is, these are my thoughts. Whether you agree with them or not, I'm not really bothered. As long as it provokes some thought and maybe made some of you think in a different way, then it's been worthwhile. But all I can say is, Happy New Year.